Boer, Dutch, husbandman, or farmer, a South African of Dutch, German, or Huguenot descent, especially one of the early settlers of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. Today, descendants of the Boers are commonly referred to as Afrikaners. In 1652 the Dutch East India Company charged Jan van Riebeeck with establishing a shipping station on the Cape of Good Hope. Immigration was encouraged for many years, and in 1707 the European population of Cape Colony stood at 1,779 individuals. For the most part, modern Afrikaners have descended from this group. The Dutch colony prospered to the extent that the Cape Town market for agricultural produce became glutted. With market stagnation and with slaves providing most of the manual labor in the colony, there were few economic opportunities for the burgeoning white population. Eventually more than half of these people turned to the self-sufficient life of the Trekboeren, literally, wandering farmers, but perhaps better translated as dispersed ranchers. The Boers were hostile toward indigenous African peoples, with whom they fought frequent range wars, and toward the government of the Cape, which was attempting to control Boer movements and commerce. They overtly compared their way of life to that of the Hebrew patriarchs of the Bible, developing independent patriarchal communities based upon a mobile pastoralist economy. Staunch Calvinists, they saw themselves as the children of God in the wilderness, a Christian elect divinely ordained to rule the land and the backward natives therein. By the end of the 18th century the cultural links between the Boers and their urban counterparts were diminishing, although both groups continued to speak Afrikaans, a language that had evolved from the admixture of Dutch, indigenous African, and other languages. The Cape Colony became a British possession in 1806 as a result of the Napoleonic Wars. Though at first accepting of the new colonial administration, the Boers soon grew disgruntled with the liberal policies of the British, especially in regard to the frontier and the freeing of slaves. Between 1835 and 1843 about 12,000 Boers left the Cape in the Great Trek, heading for the relatively rural spaces of the High Veld and Southern Natal. In 1852 the British government agreed to recognize the independence of the settlers in the Transvaal, later the South African Republic, and in 1854 of those in the Vaal-Orange Rivers area, later the Orange Free State. These new republics committed themselves to apartheid, a policy of strict segregation and discrimination. In 1867 the discovery of diamonds and gold in southern Africa set the stage for the South African War 1899–1902. The conflict had its origins in British claims of suzerainty over the wealthy South African Republic and in British concern over the Boer refusal to grant civic rights to the so-called outlanders, immigrants, largely British, to the Transvaal gold fields and diamond fields. Supported by the Orange Free State and some of the Cape Dutch, the South African Republic waged a battle against the British Empire for more than 2 years. Though brilliant practitioners of guerrilla warfare, the Boers eventually surrendered to British forces in 1902, thus ending the independent existence of the Boer republics. Despite their reabsorption into the British colonial system subsequent to the war, the Afrikaners retained their language and culture and eventually attained politically the power they had failed to establish militarily. Apartheid was soon re-established in South Africa, remained key to the country's public policies throughout most of the 20th century, and was abolished in the 1990s only after global censure. Afrikaners in the early 21st century made up about 60% of the white population of South Africa, approximately 2,600,000 people. Dutch East India Company, trading company founded in the Dutch Republic, present-day Netherlands, in 1602 to protect that state's trade in the Indian Ocean and to assist in the Dutch War of Independence from Spain. The company prospered through most of the 17th century as the instrument of the powerful Dutch commercial empire in the East Indies, present-day Indonesia. It was dissolved in 1799. The Dutch government granted the company a trade monopoly in the waters between the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and the Straits of Magellan between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, with the right to conclude treaties with native princes, to build forts and maintain armed forces, and to carry on administrative functions through officials who were required to take an oath of loyalty to the Dutch government. Under the administration of forceful governors-general, most notably Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, 1618–23, and Anthony van Diemen, 1636–45, the company was able to defeat the British fleet and largely displace the Portuguese in the East Indies. In 1619 the company renamed Jakarta Batavia, now Jakarta, and used it as a base to conquer Java and the outer islands. By the late 17th century the company had declined as a trading and sea power and had become more and more involved in the affairs of Java. By the 18th century the company had changed from a commercial shipping enterprise to a loose territorial organization interested in the agricultural produce of the Indonesian archipelago. Toward the end of the 18th century the company became corrupt and seriously in debt. The Dutch government eventually revoked the company's charter and in 1799 took over its debts and possessions. Great Trek, the emigration of some 12,000 to 14,000 Boers from Cape Colony in South Africa between 1835 and the early 1840s, in rebellion against the policies of the British government and in search of fresh pasturelands. The Great Trek is regarded by Afrikaners as a central event of their 19th century history and the origin of their nationhood. It enabled them to outflank the Xhosa peoples who were blocking their eastward expansion, to penetrate into Natal and the Highveld, which had been opened up by the tribal wars of the previous decade, and to carry white settlement north to the Limpopo River. The migrating Boers, called Voortrekkers Afrikaans, early migrants, left in a series of parties of kinfolk and neighbors, with an almost equal number of mixed-race dependents, under prominent leaders. Though they all crossed the Orange River, they were soon divided into their ultimate destination. Some wanted an outlet to the sea in Natal, and others wished to remain on the Highveld. In both areas, after initial setbacks, they were able to defeat powerful African military kingdoms through the skilled use of horses, guns, and defensive laggers encampments, though in later years they were to find the problems of maintaining control over Africans and establishing stable politics more intractable. In Natal the Voortrekkers established a short-lived republic, but, after its annexation by the British in 1843, most rejoined their compatriots across the Drakensberg, where, except for a short period, the British government was reluctant to pursue them. In 1852 and 1854 the British granted independence to the Trekkers in the Transvaal and Transorangia regions, respectively. In Transvaal several warring little polities were established, and factional strife ended only in the 1860s. In Transorangia the Trekkers established the Orange Free State, which, under the double threat posed by the Sotho and the proximity of imperial power, settled down in more unified fashion after the British withdrawal in 1854.